This is the free trader Beowulf calling anyone. Mayday. We are under... Main drive is gone. Turret number 1 not responding. Mayday. Losing cabin pressure fast. Calling anyone.
Please help.
This is free trader Beowulf. Mayday.
Shall we play a game?
Why, yes. I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Live from Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for tuning in, whether you're listening live at 1 p.m. Central on 101.1 FM The Answer in the Little Rock, Central Arkansas area, or on the live stream at 101fmtheanswer.com, or if you're listening by podcast or on Krypton Radio or on YouTube, as my guest today was talking about, any of those ways you're listening, I'm just glad to have you. Again, this is Shane Stacks. This is Shane Plays Geek Talk, and it's Geek Talk Radio. Just like to have fun, and I talk about a variety of topics. Even though it's Shane Plays, I'm not always talking about games. I talk about anything that seems to be geeky or pop culture. But today we will be talking about a game that is actually kind of near and dear to my heart, and I'll explain why here in a moment. But first, I'm going to introduce my guest, and this is we're going to be talking today about the Traveler RPG. And this game has been around since 1977. It's one of the original role-playing games that came on the market, and I don't think it was the very first science fiction, but it was definitely one of the first. I was actually looking that up, David. It's David Elmore is my guest. Thanks for being on the show, man. So glad to have you.
Thank you.
And you were sharing that way back in the distant past that you've got a little bit of radio experience. What were you up to then?
I was a board operator in the good old days when we used tape and before home computers and all of that kind of thing.
You hear that, Zach? You used to have to use tape. You got it easy. We used to have to walk uphill both ways in the snow, man.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Zach's in there. He just presses a button. I'm just joking. It's still, anytime new technology comes along, it fixes one thing but makes other things complicated, right?
Absolutely.
So, hey, now I've heard the horror stories. I've got buddies that have done radio about trying to keep up with the tape and the buttons and all that. Zach, what's the thing that stresses you out the most in there, buddy?
Just making sure everything is running smoothly. To tell you the truth, I mean, there's really not one particular thing. It's just make sure that everything is, I don't know, like I press the right buttons or something. It's
right.
Not no one particular thing.
One particular thing?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I know that tape stuff used to be pretty crazy. So
you don't know the terror of putting in a cart for for a commercial, and pushing the button when it's time to play that commercial, and nothing
happens. It's all your fault. Wait,
just making sure we're on the air.
Making sure we're on the air. That's a big one. All right. Okay. So anyway, this is David Elmore. And what was your radio experience again? Was it college, or was it you actually in? I mean, what were you doing?
College, and then later in local radio. Actually, if I can say the name of the call letters, I think it's still around. KARN.
Yeah, that's fine.
Back in the day, was a news radio station, and the Arkansas Radio Network was part of that, and other radio stations around Little Rock and Central Arkansas.
Okay, cool. And now, do you want to give a shout out to where you are now?
Yeah, I work at Arkansas Educational Television Network, AETN, and. No, I don't know Big Bird personally, but he is a big presence at our station.
At the station. All right. So very cool. All right. Well, again, we're going to be talking about the Traveler RPG today, and we have a veritable cornucopia of tabletop RPG news. So people want to definitely stay tuned for that. So what I want to do, what we're going to do today, David, and also, we were going to have Wes Taylor on the show today because David, you run Classic Original Traveler, and Wes is a local GM that runs Modern Traveler. So it was going to be an interesting sort of mix of whatever. But my personal interest is in the classic Traveler. So, and we'll talk about some of the other editions and things like that. But Wes, we love you. We hope that you didn't get lost in the Spinward Marches or something like that. And hopefully we'll see you soon, buddy.
Hopefully it wasn't on the Trader Beowulf.
Yeah, the free Trader Beowulf. Yes, this is the free Trader Beowulf calling. Classic. What David's referring to there is the cover for the box of the very first edition of Traveler had what I think is a very good marketing move. Instead of, before you even read the name, I've got it right here. You got this script, and I've always imagined it as this staticky sort of in and out transmission. I don't know how other people, but all you don't get any pictures. You just get the words, and it says, "This is the free Trader Beowulf calling anyone. Mayday, Mayday, we are under attack. Main drive is gone. Turret number 1 not responding. Mayday, losing cabin pressure. Fast, calling anyone. Please help. This is free Trader Beowulf. Mayday." And if that didn't entice you, that's a very smart thing to do. And then underneath that, it said Traveler and all that. So it was, I thought that was pretty neat. So, and I think a lot of people, when you talk about classic Traveler, they think of the free Trader Beowulf, because that just is such a cool thing that a lot of people latched onto.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I had this for a news item, but I'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and talk about it now since it's come up. Did you know that, do you know what the deal was with the free Trader Beowulf?
At this point, my brain is not remembering because I hadn't played that particular scenario in such a long time. Right. And so I'm not remembering it. I apologize.
Well, there's a reason you're not remembering it, because you're in original Traveler, it was like GURPS kind of, where it was a set of rules, but it wasn't a setting.
Correct.
So there was no scenario it was whatever the GM wanted to make it. I think they called it the referee.
Yes, that was the referee. Yes.
Whatever, because like the Imperium and all the third, that didn't come along till later.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So the reason you don't remember, and your brain is like trying to fill in the gap, is it wasn't there. So there's a link that will be in the show notes. The podcast and Krypton Radio and the YouTube and all that versions will have show notes at shaneplays.com, and there will be a link in there, and it says what was happening to the free Trader Beowulf, and this was a forum on RPG.net where they discussed it, and the general consensus is there never really was it was just pure imagination, right? To fire up your imagination.
Correct. Yeah. And there was a lot of supplements, adventure supplements many years later, or not many, but some years later, where they had lots of adventures available. And now that you're bringing that to my attention, I am recalling that that's correct. And it was just like the early Dungeons and Dragons. It was all, there weren't any supplements and adventures. It was all just kind of homebrew, as they call it now. Well, in fact, Gary
Gygax was very opposed to publishing modules at first, because there was a multitude of reasons. But then when they saw that everybody wanted them and they sold well, then of course they started doing that. But at the beginning, Gary Gygax did not want to. He wanted the DMs to come up with their own stuff. And I think he was also worried about players reading the module before, the DM ran it or whatever. So, but yeah, as user Jackleg says on RPG.net forum here, remember, this link will be in the show notes. So I think it was left unanswered for the GM to answer. The original Traveler rules would be a framework for the GM's own setting, but fans got curious about Mark Miller's campaign. Now, Mark Miller was one of the designers, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Still active, too.
And they ended up getting the Third Imperium because of that. And then since then, the system and the setting have stuck together. So whereas initially that wasn't the goal. So anyway, and just give us the elevator pitch, and then we'll move over into some news and other stuff. What is Traveler? Well, like what if you're going one floor down with somebody in an elevator and you were trying to explain Traveler, what would you say?
Well, as you said in your promotion for it, it's hard science fiction role playing, and you can do your homebrew version of it, or you can do the supplements, and it is an adventure in space, and you can do almost anything, and almost the same things you can do in the fantasy role-playing games, except that you have laser weapons and alien creatures and space travel and combat, all kinds of different things that you can do. And it's just taking that science fiction side of everybody those that like science fiction, and using that or fulfilling that kind of need in your role-playing side. In fact, Mark Miller, when they were designing it, they encouraged people to use some of the science fiction novels they read as scenarios to expand into your story. Before all of the Third Imperium and the books, that's what they used. Go get a Jerry Purnell novel or a Isaac Asimov and kind of go beyond that story and create your own science fiction scenario.
So, and if some people, believe it or not, and one of the reasons why I do Shane Plays the way I do, and I don't just stick to one topic, like a lot of shows and podcasts is one topic, that's all they do every week. I have a wide range of topics because I want to talk about stuff I love, but I also want to introduce people to things. So there's people out there listening that really may not know what hard sci-fi means. So my way of putting it, and feel free to add to this or correct me or whatever, hard sci-fi, even though it's still fiction and you can't be 100% realistic, tries to be as realistic as possible in its depictions of technology and how the environment of a planet and what would happen to you if you were in space. And for example, Traveler, you have to make hyperspace jumps faster than light, FTL. I mean, they were talking about FTL way back in the day, way before, like Battlestar Galactica remake came along and all that. Right. But it still took like a week to make a relatively short FTL jump. And there's no faster than light communications.
Correct.
Right. There's none of this subspace radio. So that's just a couple of examples. There's no, now there's psionics, possibly like mental, but there's no force. There's no, aliens are probably going to be somewhat realistic. They're not going to be the bug-eyed monster of the week. Right. It's realistic. As opposed to space opera, which is basically fantasy with science fiction appearing things sprinkled on top of it, right? They don't care about realism. They just want to tell a dramatic epic story,
exactly.
Right? Is there anything you would add to that to kind of help explain hard sci-fi?
Yes, and actually it dates to a lot of the famous science fiction authors like Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, and those gentlemen of that era who actually in their earlier lives were involved in the U.S. military during World War II, and some of them were in radar and intelligence services. And so when they came out, they began writing these science fiction stories using real science. Arthur Clarke was well known to be the favorite of many astronauts because his science fiction was so realistic to what would really happen in space.
Right.
Of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey is his most famous novel. And so those realities were tempered by having real science that seemed to work. And people would go, oh, okay, that's true. You can't go walking outside of a spaceship without a spacesuit on.
You will, it will go bad very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, even if you hold your breath. So I guess another, you mentioned Heinlein or Heinlein, depending. I've always been a big fan of his work. Here's a good example of something that's hard sci-fi that some people may assume is more loosey-goosey space opera kind of stuff. I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about the book Starship Troopers.
Correct.
The way the power armor, the power armor didn't come anywhere near the movie. But one of the most fascinating things about the novel was the power armor. And even though it was fantastical and not real, the way he described it and the way it worked and the training and everything was incredibly realistic. And his depiction of the military was pretty hardcore, So, and I don't know if there's a lot of examples of hard sci-fi. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is not space opera. This is hard sci-fi. I would say it's probably the closest thing to hard sci-fi on TV right now is The Expanse.
Yes.
This will be
Love
more
that show.
this will be more hard sci-fi than The Expanse, right? But The Expanse for a TV show is pretty hard sci-fi.
In
right?
fact, I am convinced that the creators of The Expanse
are Traveler.
Probably played Traveler at some time or another.
I thought about that. Like, and one example I'm thinking about with The Expanse is in the first season, there was a scene where they needed to do a hard turn, and it was like they couldn't just turn; they had to buckle down, and they had to almost like run fluids through their body so that the compression forces wouldn't. I mean, that's very hard sci-fi right there.
Right.
It's like, well, it's going to take us 8 hours to prep, and then we've got to turn. So anyway, okay, moving on. So that's Traveler. Traveler's hard sci-fi. There are aliens, and there's advanced technology, and there's cybernetics and all this, but it's not, it's going to be from a very realistic standpoint.
Correct.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. We will be coming back to Traveler later in the show after some news and other stuff. And one of the things we'll talk about, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag right now, but Traveler, the original Traveler, is famous or infamous depending on how you look at it for its character creation system. So I definitely, and you've got to stick around and listen to that because I love it. It's one of the things I love about Traveler. But, there's people that are like, what? They're going to have a hard time with it. So, and in later editions of Traveler do not have this from what I, or maybe it's optional.
Correct. Yes,
so,
that's true.
All right. So, David, I don't know how familiar you are with the weekly show, but the head of my news team, Sal, and now it's not him, but it's his grandmother and her dog Muffin. If I don't banter with Zach, they get really upset. Okay,
go right ahead.
As far as they're concerned, Zach's the star of the show, and I'm just the stuff they have to get through to get to Zach. Okay, that's just how it is. Now, at the end, there's strange things have happened, David. Strange things have happened over the past year or so. But we got a message in early January that there was a New Year's resolution. They were turning over a new leaf. And, I really suspect it's not Sal's grandmother. I'm really thinking Muffin is the main driver of the wackiness here. But there was, a peace offering was offered, and there was, discussion of turning over a new leaf and working together. Well, so Zach, are you ready for this?
What's up?
Okay. So the Mobley Detective Agency, who stays on top of this for us, has found evidently Muffin has a smartphone. Okay, all I can do is report what's passed to me. All right. Evidently Muffin has a smartphone, and the Mobley Detective Agency somehow intercepted texts indicating that when January ends, which we're February 2nd now, the resolution for peaceful coexistence is ended. So, I don't know. I haven't seen the text myself. Also, the head of the Mobley Detective Agency shared with me that they wish that they would have gone to Dragon Ball Broly with us because they wanted to see you jump around. After they heard me talking about you jumping around and getting all excited, they said they would have paid just to watch that. So, just to let you know. So, all right. Also, Mr. Sports Analyst, that's Zach's ultimate. Is that still your goal to kind of head that way? Is that still your goal? To be a sports analyst? Okay. So tomorrow we're getting the annual flyby of the superb owl, which is the most amazing owl, and it's the most viewed flyover of an owl every year.
I'm actually glad you say that because you're not allowed to say it the other way.
You're not?
You're not allowed to right now.
What? What are you talking about? I didn't like legally. I can't say.
Yep.
I can't say the bowl that Superman would eat out of. Are you kidding me?
Yes.
Is it like there's a legal thing saying that we're not allowed to say that?
I'm not sure if it's legal or not, but it's just that's why you haven't seen Buffalo Wild Wings or different places have it posted.
Oh, well, using it for their own promotions. Okay. Well, there's also, without mentioning the name, I don't know, just in case, I don't know what's going on with all that. But yeah, I could see them cracking down like, we're having a whatever party.
Right.
To attract people, which is stupid because then it gets more viewers watching the commercials. But anyway, I'm going to get out of that. That's not my business. But they're also, on the same day that the superb owl do you like the superb owl?
I do. I really do.
David, are you a fan of it's the most magnificent owl that flies across the nation once a year.
Oh, well then, yes. I do.
It's magnificent. But on the same day, there's a huge football game that evidently we can't say the name of, but think of the bowl that Superman eats his cereal out of. Zach, who do you got and why?
Well, I root for the New England Patriots.
Right,
and
which has bothered and offended more than one guest, but you go right ahead, sir.
The state of Arkansas.
Right.
So,
all right.
Want to give a prediction?
Who you got and why?
Oh, well, of course the Patriots because they're my favorite team.
Right.
But probably
you're not gonna deflate as a fan and give up on them.
I don't. I've seen them lose 3 times already in the Super Bowl.
Would this be 5 rings for Tom Brady?
It would be 6.
6,
like Michael Jordan.
All right. So you've got. But what are you calling it at? What's your over under score? Whatever. What was all that?
I'm gonna go over under around 30 points.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
You're really thinking Brady's going to do it.
Not just, the
whole team.
Yeah.
All right. Mm-hmm. Man, we were talking at work, and I couldn't care about sports ball for nothing. I've tried, David. I just don't care. I'm not against it. It just doesn't do anything for me. But they were talking at work this week. You got the Patriots, or is it the Rams?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The
Los
Angeles Rams, and the hate for the Patriots. But a lot of it was just based, it sounded to me like on envy. Like really, like there was like, I'm just tired to see, and then there were some people saying they're a bunch of cheaters. Now, I don't know. I'm just saying that's what I heard.
Well, those are two reasons, those are 2 common reasons.
The common reasons? Yeah. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm just saying that's what I heard.
Right.
So as they play tomorrow in the bowl that would be that Superman eats his cereal from. All right. So, and then I got a surprise for you, David. I'm going to need your help. In advance, I got you a Super Bowl ring. Can you run that in there to him, David?
Sure.
Would you mind taking that in there to him? I got that for you, Zach.
I got to see.
I called Tom Brady.
Okay.
And I said, can you get my producer, Zach, a Super Bowl ring? He said, no problem. And it came in yesterday. You like that?
I do.
Yeah?
I like it.
I know that looks like that it would come out of off a cupcake, but it's not. That is you saw it, David. That's 100% Super Bowl ring right there. It did not come off a cupcake. That is a legit, priceless Super Bowl ring. So for you, buddy, for all the hard work you do.
Absolutely.
And so I want you to hang that on your wall or hang it from your mirror in your car. And that you keep your eye on your dreams of being a sports analyst, baby. All right. So, David, are you a sports guy at all, or do you?
Not a huge sports guy.
Yeah.
My thing's more baseball.
Yeah.
But I did get to work with one of the great sports analysts, the late great Jim Elder, who used to work at KAR many years ago.
Well known.
Guy.
If Dave Ellswick was in here, this is Dave Ellswick's studio. If you can't tell, I don't know how familiar you are with Dave Ellswick.
Yes.
But anyway, I'm sure he would probably rave on the guy. All right, so Zach, one other thing. This wasn't going to be something I was going to banter with you about, but I saw it right before the show. It's not a news item or anything, but I read an article right before I left the house to come to the show.
Okay.
That people are speculating that Whis is trying to set Goku up as the next destroyer god.
Well, he's been actually trying to do that for a while. Not just not just Goku, also Vegeta as well.
I think he wants the Gogeta. I don't know, but they were pointing out stuff that happened in the movie, and also a lot of stuff that was done and said during the Tournament of Power.
Yeah, it's really during the show. Basically, he's been hitting at that. He's been training both Goku and Vegeta.
Well, he also at the beginning of Broly, kind of joking around, he said, "What, Goku? Do you want to be the next destroyer god?"
Yeah.
Right. So, but anyway, all right, we got to move on because we're going to talk RPG news and we're going to be talking Traveler later in the show, folks. I do have, and I'll put a link in the show notes. I'm giving away a signed copy of Trump's Space Force from local comic creator Timothy Lim. He did the art. Mark Pellegrini did some of the writing. Chuck Dixon did the writing. Brett Smith, Dave Dorman are involved in this. You can't go buy this. You had to have did the crowdfunding on Indiegogo. I've got an extra copy. It's signed, and I've also got a Trump's Space Force patch. So here's the thing. You have to retweet or reply to the tweets I've been sending out about this contest. So the link will be in the show notes to one of the tweets, but if you're listening live, go to Twitter and search for @ShanePlays. That's my Twitter, @ShanePlays, huge space huge, not huge, huge with a Y, Y-U-G-E, and you'll find one of those and just retweet it and or reply to it and to be entered. So also I did forget to throw out our call-in number if people want to call in. This live show is 501-823-0965. That's 501-823-0965, or you can tweet me at Shane Plays. So speaking of the news of Sal and the news team, Zach, let's turn on the secret microphone in the newsroom. There they go. Working hard on a Saturday. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're hitting those typewriters. Sal's old school.
What's a typewriter?
Yeah, well, Sal's got one. I don't know where he finds the ink for it, the ribbon. But anyway, folks, remember, for every $1 of support the show gets, the news team gets, or $1 that we get by Patreon, the news team gets a penny an hour raise. What a deal. I think that the negotiations with the union fell through, Zach, so that we didn't go to 2 pennies an hour. So anyway, maybe they'll bring that back up next year. All right, so I got a couple of cool news items here, and then we'll get to a break, come back, finish up the news, and talk Traveler. So there are 3 major role-playing game anniversaries, basically from January or early. I think it's all January. Do you happen to know what those are, David?
No.
Okay. So the first one is D&D, 45 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, D&D's 45th birthday. And John Peterson of Playing at the World, who has been on this show more than once, excellent RPG scholar, researching the history. Every time he posts, I have to go read his stuff because it's really good. But he posted that today, now there's a little bit of disagreement on the exact date, whether it's January 30th or January 27th, or there's a little bit of back and forth. But based on the date that the copyright was applied for and everything, John Peterson pegs it at January 30th, 1974. But there, like I said, there's a little bit of some people say January 26th. But basically late January is the anniversary for when D&D came out.
Very cool.
Yeah, and he posted a handwritten note on this will be in the show notes on his blog Playing at the World, and it said it's a note from Gary Gygax to Dave Arneson, and it says rules parentheses D&D only a few days from printing, look great, best Gary. That's pretty neat. That's cool. A cool little piece of history right there. And like I said, if people want to go read that, it'll be in the show notes. You can just go to Playing at the World blog, look for the D&D's 45th birthday news item. And there's some further discussion in there about the trademark and all that stuff. But he explains his reasoning why he came to January 30th is when he celebrates it. 45 years. I'm 46. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. All right. And the 2 other, and this I wouldn't have even known about. I pay attention to everything John Peterson does, but these other games, I wouldn't have known about this. If Morris's unofficial Table Talk RPG Talk hadn't mentioned them during their most recent episode, where they're talking about Dragonlance, by the way, which is one of my favorite settings. It's also Battletech's 35th anniversary.
That game.
Yeah, and Shadowrun's 30th anniversary. So those are all pretty big names. Now, Battletech, you could argue, is not really a role-playing game. I think they've had role-playing games published with it, but it started as a strategic mech combat game, right? It's like Starfleet Battles, but with mechs, kind of. I mean, that's kind of a way to say it. So, and then the last thing I'll go before the break is there's an essay. I actually posted this around Facebook and on social media today, but I'm also going to link it in the show notes. And it's by a guy named Rick Neal, and he posted this on his blog. And the title of the essay, now you GM a lot, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me how you react to this phrase. I'm sorry, but that's what my character would do.
If your character really would do that, then I would go for it.
Right.
But if they don't, or if it's not within their the way they've always played their character, then you start thinking, well, I don't know about that.
Right. I have heard it used when it's correct, like, yeah, that's really how my character acts. I've also heard it more than once used to justify a ridiculous action that throws a complete wrench into everything. And so that character or that player gets to have a few minutes of fun while everybody else at the table is just not enjoying it. And like, why did you do that? And, so this essay goes a lot into, he kind of talks about his personal, how he's changed as a gamer over the years and that kind of playing. And it's all like every table and group is different.
Right.
If nobody cares that you're doing a bunch of goofy stuff and saying my character would do that, even though it's obviously a boneheaded thing to do, go for it. But just be aware there's a lot of people at my group, there's literally times where somebody will say that and everybody else at the table goes, oh, come on, and they're not happy with it. But that, somebody sticks to their guns. Like one example I can think of was there was like 1,000 troglodytes. And there was like 5 of them. And the troglodytes weren't paying attention to them. And he said, well, I'm just going to fire an arrow in there and get their attention and start a big fight. Because that's what my character would do. It's like, well, so you're going to bring instant death down on us because that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's not what their character would have done. They wanted to see the chaos that would result from that's what they wanted to see, right? So this is more of what this essay is talking about.
Right. If it disrupts the gameplay and everybody isn't enjoying themselves, then yeah, that's not right.
And that's what the point of this essay gets to. Now, role-playing games, in a lot of ways, are subjective and not objective. Even most games say feel free to disregard certain rules or whatever. So you don't necessarily have to agree with this essay. I don't agree with everything that the essay said. I agree with the overall thesis of the essay, but I recommend people go check it out. It'll be on the show notes for the podcast, Krypton Radio version and all that, but you can just say, I'm sorry, search for I'm sorry, that's what my character would do. It is by Rick Neal, and you'll find it. So, Zach, I'm going to give love to a sponsor, and then we'll hit a break, and then when we come back, we'll do a little bit more news, and we'll talk about Traveler. The Traveler RPG. The free Trader Beowulf's out there waiting for some sort of, it could be a Kobayashi Maru.
Exactly.
Yeah, you never know. So,
Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today.
The die is cast.
Plunge into worlds of fantastic adventure where dragons lie and the undead stalk the shades of your mind's imagines. Where creatures of legend plunder wealth through the horror of their passage. Monsters grim and foul hold the ecstasy of gold and the renown of glory. All this and more awaits you and your friends in the unlimited, fantastic world of the Castles and Crusades role-playing game from Trollord Games. Visit your friendly local game store or Trollord.com to get your copy today. A rules-light, adaptable game that has stood the test of time. 12 years in constant publication with no new additions. Castles and Crusades is the original, easy-to-play attribute check system. Join us and unleash your imagination. Visit your friendly local game store or Trollord.com to get your copy of Castles and Crusades today. Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.
hey, welcome back to Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm joined by David Elmore, who is a longtime RPG player and specifically a Traveler RPG, and we're talking about the classic, beloved. It's one of those games that outside of the role-playing community, a lot of people might not have heard of it, but inside the role-playing community, it has a very, very, very hardcore fan base. And just to, one of the things we talked about earlier in the show is it's hard sci-fi. So it's not an exact correlation or comparison, but think of The Expanse, that kind of science fiction. It's a little bit more realistic. We got a couple of news items that we're still going to get through, and then we're going to talk Traveler. Thanks again, David, for joining. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
So the last news items I'm just going to push through here are really quick. These will all be linked in the show notes. Steve Jackson Games, which also has a special place in my heart, is having a convention in Austin from April 6th to 7th, and they're calling it FNORDCon. I don't know why they're calling it FNORDCon, but they're calling it FNORDCon. So you go to Steve Jackson Games website at sjgames.com or search for FNORDCon, FNORDCON, Steve Jackson Games. And it'll also be linked on the show notes for the podcast and Krypton radio version of the show. But they're saying they're going to do Ogre, Car Wars, The Fantasy Trip, which was one of the first fantasy RPGs, Munchkin, of course, Ogre minis, and just all kinds of other cool stuff. So check that out. Also, we had a previous show a few months ago with Morris of EN World, and he was doing the Judge Dredd in the Worlds of 2000 AD Kickstarter for the RPG, and that was wildly successful. Well, the hard copy books are about to ship, but you can now, I think as of yesterday, the core rule book for Judge Dredd and Worlds of 2000 AD and the Robot Wars, which is the first adventure supplement, is now available on DriveThru RPG. So you can get it digitally. Core rule book, I believe, is $19.99, and the Robot Wars supplement is $9.99. I played a quick start version of this game 2 or 3 months ago, and we had probably the only game where I've ever laughed harder was Paranoia. Did you ever play Paranoia, David?
No.
That game was crazy. We had such a good time playing this game. So last Penny Arcade, I think Acquisitions Incorporated and all those guys have partnered with Wizards of the Coast to publish an official Acquisitions Incorporated dungeon manual. So this will be an official Wizards of the Coast product, and it's the first official third-party D&D book. According to the announcement, with this new manual, fans will be able to franchise their own branch of the famous Finders Collective. So currently in its 11th year, Acquisitions Incorporated began as a podcast hosted by Wizards of the Coast producer Chris Perkins, and it had the Penny Arcade folks, and it's grown to where they do a lot of live shows. It's huge. The PAX conventions usually have an Acquisitions Incorporated game, and it's just absolutely huge, and they do a lot. They've got the A's team and the B team and the C team and all this stuff now. So now you can play your own official franchise of Acquisitions Incorporated in D&D. And I also noticed when I was checking out Neverwinter the other night, the online MMORPG that's set, it's D&D. There's some Acquisitions Incorporated content there. So anyway, okay, that's it for the news. Let's get here. David was kind enough to bring in some dice. So I've got some 6-sided dice here. So hold on a second. There you go. You can roll yours too there, David, if you want. We're going to talk about Traveler. And these are really cool because the classic colors associated with Traveler are red and black. And these are little black 6-siders with red pips. So those are very cool. Nice little touch. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
So let me tell you, David, Traveler is very special to me because I actually played Traveler before I ever played D&D.
Wow.
Yeah. So what had happened was I was probably in 6th grade, something like that, maybe 7th. And it was like a Saturday or a summer day or something. I had a day when I go to school, and I woke up, and for some reason I took a piece of paper and I kind of drew out like a map for like a board game. This is kind of fantasy flavored, and I made up some rules for it. So I ran over to my friend Carrie Levere's house. This is back in the early 80s, and I showed it to him. I was like, let's play this. And like he was nice and played it with me, but he's like, let me tell you about this game I just played called Traveler. And Carrie was one of those, we all have these guys growing up that are a couple of years older than us. and they're in a different school and higher grade, and we just look up to them, right?
Right.
So I was like, okay. And so he didn't have any of the books, but he had just played it like recently. And we played Traveler all day from his memory. And I'm sure it had nothing to do with the real Traveler, but it was a blast. And then later, are you from Arkansas? Are you from this area?
Yes.
You remember Bozo's in McCain Mall? There was a toy store called Bozo's, and it wasn't your typical chain. They would have stuff you wouldn't find at any other, and they had Traveler books there. So I remember I bought a couple of Traveler books, and my mom was like, "That says for referee only. Should you be reading that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." You know, I didn't care, right? We just, you know, and I was just fascinated with Traveler. It definitely has a big spot in my early RPG history. I played Traveler and Villains and Vigilantes much more before I played D&D. Wow. Now I love D&D. But,
and I remember Villains and Vigilantes.
And they're out again now. Yeah, those guys have a new edition out now, Jeff D. and Jack Herman. And I've actually had them on the show a couple times. It's a huge, I geeked out. Terrible show because all I did was just fanboy the entire time.
That's great.
Yeah, but they've been on twice, actually. But anyway, so but having said all that, I've always kept up with Traveler since then. But I've never really played a lot of Traveler. Now, you were at Arkansas RPG Con playing Traveler.
Right.
And Wes Taylor will occasionally at local conventions and stuff, he will run an all-day version. Like, he'll go for like 12 hours, and people can just jump in and out whenever they want to.
Right.
Now, he plays a more I'm assuming he's playing the Mongoose version. I could be wrong.
I think so.
Yeah. Now, but you still play the original
classic
Game
Traveler.
Designers Workshop. Came out in 1977.
The famous Little Black Books.
All right. So, what got you into Traveler? And do you play any other RPGs, or are you just like Travelers?
Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. In fact, I was talking with a good friend of mine, Jeff Krause, and he and I DM. And play a lot, and we figured out just the other day that we're in our 40th year of playing role-playing, in particular Dungeons and
Dragons. I think I started playing Dungeons and Dragons in 8th grade, which would be 86, something like that. So we played the Blue Book, the BECME, Basic and Expert rules.
Right.
But we mixed it interchangeably with AD&D First Edition. With, you know, we're just like, whatever. We didn't know what we were doing, but we loved it. So anyway, so tell me more about Traveler. How'd you get into Traveler?
You know, I've been thinking back, trying to remember how I first came upon it. I think it was because I just spotted the Little Black Book in the House of Hobbies on university back in the day. And I just remember flipping through it and thinking, oh, this is interesting. And I was kind of, at the time, a little bored with D&D or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons at the time, and I thought, well, let's just try this and play, and we'll kind of switch back and forth and play, you know, D&D one night and this another night. And
back in the days where we had time like that,
exactly. Yeah. And so then I, bought some of the books, and then eventually they came out with a little black box that had the books in it, and then we just started playing, and it just was a fascinating way to role play science fiction. And there at the time wasn't that many different ones that were available at the time. Mm-hmm. I think TSR had created something called Gamma World, which was their attempt. Right. And they had previously, the first role-playing game was called Metamorphosis Alpha.
That was the first sci-fi. And that was just a piece of trivia I learned last night. Because I assumed Traveler was the first, but no, it was Metamorphosis Alpha.
Correct.
Right.
And so anyway, they had tried to meet that market, but I think Traveler just kind of outdid them. And it's not totally dissimilar, but it is markedly different enough that it was a really interesting, and you could really put your imagination into it, especially if you were a big fan of science fiction. You could just take that and go anywhere with it.
Right. Now, again, science fiction, not necessarily space opera.
Correct.
Right. Some people lump them together, and that's fine if you want to.
Right.
But they're not the same genre, even though they kind of look the same.
Exactly.
So, the one thing about like Traveler and other games like it, like TSR was putting out Gamma World, Star Frontiers, all that stuff. And I was like, when I was growing up, I would buy a lot of role-playing games just because I wanted to see how they worked. A lot of times I didn't even get to play them. But I always loved to see how like non-TSR game systems were designed. And Traveler felt very strange and exotic to me because it was about as non-TSR style of a game as you're going to find, or Villains and Vigilantes, or these other games I've been playing. So we've got to talk. There's so much stuff we could talk about, but we have to spend a couple of minutes on the famous and/or infamous character creation mechanic that the original Traveler had. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the easiest way to describe it is I like to say that it was role-playing your character into existence. And the cool thing about it, and I don't think this was available in any other role-playing game I've ever heard of. I think it's completely unique to Classic Traveler. In the original Classic Traveler, they changed it when they went to different editions. Your character could die before you ever actually played an adventure. In the rolling up process.
So hard. I love that so much.
It's brutal, but it's fun because as you're role-playing them into existence, there's different things that can happen, and then you go off on your adventures, but you could conceivably die before you got started.
Yeah, and let's for the people who are whose jaws have just hit the floor. Let me kind of explain what's happening here. In most role-playing games at that time, and mostly still today, but definitely at that time, you basically started as like a first level, which meant you were like just a hair above a muggle. You had just barely somehow you were different enough that you weren't just an average person, and you were first level. So you were compared to a common person, you were exceptional, but compared to most stuff out there, you would get stomped and squished real easy.
Right.
And then as you adventured, you accumulated experience points, and you got better and better and better, or died.
Right.
In Traveler, once you start playing the game, you're basically, for the most part, who you are. And I can't remember, was there an experience mechanic where you could...
No, there wasn't.
Right. So
your experience was the various skills that you acquired in the rolling
character
up process.
creation. Right.
Yes.
So it was basically like, once you started adventuring, that's who you are. And you were really more about wealth acquisition or fame acquisition or empire building or something like that.
Right.
So the character creation process was actually, I think they called it your career. What was your career before you, or what did you do before you started adventuring? And was it in like 4-year spurts or something like that?
4-year clumps.
So for every 4 years you decided to have had a career before you adventured, you could get skills and skill points, but also potentially get hurt or die.
Correct.
Right? If you're like, I was in the military, then you might have lost an arm or something, or you could die. So there's very much a risk versus reward thing here, where the longer your career was before you adventured, you got a chance for more stuff and more skill points.
Right.
But you had a greater chance of losing a limb or dying or something like that. Now, I personally love that because there's a risk versus reward thing in there that appeals to me in games.
Right.
If I want the better stuff, I got to risk something for it. There's a lot of people that are going to hate that because there's a lot of people that character creation for them is almost like artistic thing where they want to sculpt every little thing perfectly and da-da-da-da. And again, role-playing games are subjective. So if that's what people are into, good. But that really appeals to me. Now, what when you play still today, do you still go with that style of character creation?
I do, yes.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
I mean, of course, when I did RPG Con last year, I had to roll up all the characters pre-advanced because you can literally spend your entire first day of gaming just creating your characters.
Right.
And I didn't want people to have to go through that.
Right, because it's a mini game.
It's a mini game.
It really is a mini game. And other editions of Traveler have phased it out. So, and speaking of that, here's a little bit of trivia. The first published in 1977 by Games Designers Workshop. It's currently published, Traveler is, as of 2016 by Mongoose Publishing as Mongoose Traveler 2nd edition. There's 11 editions with multiple publishers over these years. 11. That's crazy. Including GURPS Traveler in 1998. And GURPS also released 4th edition support for Traveler in 2007. And you can get nearly all older versions of Traveler in PDF format. I guess like on Drive-Thru RPG and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And then Traveler 5 and Mongoose Traveler 2nd edition are the two quote-unquote current rule sets. Both rely on 6-sided dice exclusively. And then Traveler was inducted into the Origins Adventure Gaming Hall of Fame in 1997. So we've only got a few minutes here left, so I want to kind of turn the floor over to you. Let me give a shout out to Game Goblins Folks, Game Goblins is Central Arkansas's premier retailer of Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40K, board games, card games, RPGs, miniatures, and hobby accessories. And I'm sure they would order you the newer versions of Travelers.
Probably so.
Yeah, if you wanted. I'm not sure if I've seen it on their shelves. Call Game Goblins at 501-224-GAME or visit them online at gamegoblins.com. That's 501-224-GAME or gamegoblins.com. For all your gaming needs, I heartily recommend Game Goblins. Make sure to check out their customer loyalty program that rewards you based on your actual purchases. Game Goblins earns your business and keeps it. First-time customers mention Shane Plays and receive $10 off your purchase of $50 or more. Tell them Shane Plays sent you. All right, so for these next 4 or 5 minutes, I know you got a lot of notes. You know, we won't get through everything, but, you know, tell us a little bit about, like, just anything you want to tell me about Traveler, because I know you got some notes there.
Oh, well, thank you. I just made the notes to kind of guide me in case of the questions you had. But your characters generally start off in the Third Imperium, which takes place about 3,000 years from now.
Right.
And you can do all kinds of things. You can travel to other empires nearby that have like the Zodanes or the Hive Federation or the Aslan.
Yeah, and there's sort of other evolved type humans that have come. And then there's also aliens.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
right.
The Zodani are humans that do psionics.
Right.
The Darians are higher technological level of humans. But you also have the Vargar, who are dogs that came from Earth. They were spread. Humans were spread across this section of the galaxy. And so were the Vargar, which were dogs. Then you also have cat people called the Aslan. And then you've got...
Aslan.
Yes.
That's actually... Because Aslan from Chronicles of Narnia, evidently that's not the Muslim word because Muslim's not a language, but that's the Muslim word for lion,
right?
If I understand right.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
And then of course you've got the Kukri, which are horse people, and then the most bizarre of them all is the Hive, because they look. The best way I can describe them for people out there is it looks like a starfish head on a skinny hippopotamus's body. And
I've
that's
had
the
bad
creature.
dates like that. I don't even know what that means. Hold on. Hey-oh. I got to roll the dice for that. Hey-oh. All
There
right,
you
anyway.
go. And then, of course, the droin, which are roughly akin to like the Gorn or the Sleestack, if you know your Star Trek or Land of the
and the Gorn.
I
both.
love the Sleestack, yeah.
I used to call them the prayers because I thought they were making like a prayer noise. That's when I was like 4 or 5. But anyway, how often do you get to play?
Not as often as I'd like. I prefer to do it more often, but actually both Wes Taylor and I have been trying to put together a group of people locally who might want to meet, say, at Game Goblins or some other place and play. Just play some adventures.
I would love to play some Traveler. My thing is with games right now, I can't commit to a campaign.
Right.
But I will absolutely jump in on some occasional one shots or guest star in a campaign. So if you do that, let me know. I'd love to play.
Well, absolutely. And I of course don't have time to do my own homebrew version of everything.
Dude, you had a good setup at
yes.
Arkansas RPG Con. You had like a big what's the word I'm looking for?
Movie screen
and all this stuff going on. I wanted to play, but I had other responsibilities.
Well, and there's a website out there, and I am now spacing on what it was called, but they have the map of the section of the Milky Way galaxy where all this is at, and you can. That's what I was doing, is I was projecting it using my computer from that website up onto that screen so that people could see roughly where and what they're doing. In the universe or in the galaxy.
So I've got some footnote items here from David that came up after the show ended, but we both agreed it would be worth getting into the podcast in Krypton radio version. Anyway, so here we go. In Traveler, just like in reality, space is big. Really, really big. Really, really big. To get an idea, go to https://travelermap.com, and that's the same link that David is trying to remember during the show. It'll be in the show notes. Classic Traveler is hard sci-fi of the 70s and early 80s. Computers were huge, and home computers weren't a widespread thing. No internet, etc. For example, some ship schematics have large areas for computers. Lack of faster-than-light communications led to a more feudal/regional governmental system throughout the empire. So things were controlled on a much more local level because it took a long time for news and information to spread. Weapons run the range from rocks to firearms to lasers. Daggers and knives are still very common because you don't want to use lasers or bullets on a ship. Ships usually carried a lot of sand. If enemy ships appeared, they could drop sand that would act as sort of a chaff or defense against lasers. This sort of silicon reflective sand would often reflect or misdirect lasers. So for Traveler characters, there's no hit points. Damage is deducted from attributes like your strength or whatever, constitution. Now, Traveler has similar attributes to D&D. However, instead of wisdom and charisma, there's education and social standing. These could be codified, where the other two are more subjective. Also, there's no experience and levels in Traveler. Advancement is through wealth and status and that sort of thing. Skills can be changed during adventuring by going back to college or joining the military, etc. Or perhaps the Imperium goes to war and veterans get called back into service and that sort of thing. So skills can change and improve, but there's no levels or experience per se. Certain attributes can be changed during play. For example, you may marry into nobility, so your social standing would change. But then that might come with certain responsibilities or obligations. Or even, plot hooks like, you're part of this noble family that another noble family is trying to wipe out. So the reason that Traveler uses 6-siders is because people already had them at home, like with all, their other board games they already had. Milton Bradley, that type thing. And so they wouldn't need to go buy polyhedrals. D20, D12, D4, etc. So, and then David also wanted to point out that Traveler appealed to him when he was younger because it costs less than D&D books. The average D&D book when he was younger was $18, which that time was really expensive. Probably somewhat comparable to the $50 or whatever we spend today. Somewhere in that range anyway. Another thing I want to point out that David and I discussed is due to the lack of faster than light communications, when you showed up in a new area, people took notice and wanted to talk to you to get the latest news and information. So it was kind of almost like somebody stepping off the stagecoach in an old West town. It's you didn't necessarily just blend in. People are like, hey, what's the news from back home, kind of thing. So anyway, just again, some footnote items there. Footnote, not footnight, that we wanted to make sure to get into the podcast version.
Now, so if somebody wants to play the modern versions of Traveler, Mongoose is publishing it right now. Right. And it sounds like there's this Traveler Edition 5 out there too. How hard is it if somebody wants to play the classic stuff that you play to get that stuff? We got about a minute. We got to wrap up.
I'm not sure about how hard it is to get that material because I think you can find it pretty much online, probably through Amazon mostly, because I've seen a lot of it on Amazon.
Are you talking about like people selling their old stuff, like an old box set?
Yes, you can get the old box sets, but you can also get all of these newer editions there as well. And a quick note, if you don't mind me plugging one place, farfutureenterprises.net, I think is the name.
Farfutureenterprises.net.
Mark Miller's company.
Okay, that's one of the designers.
Yes,
okay.
And they're through. You can get them through RPG drive-through.
Okay.
They have a lot of that on PDF. You can buy CD-ROMs, or you can get the entire Kanan.
Yeah, I got to draw us down. What I want you to do is give me that link on Facebook, and I'll make sure it gets into the show notes. I got to do this to you, David. Got to do it. It's bad joke of the week. Ready, folks? Right. We've been talking Traveler, hard sci-fi RPG. Did you hear about the 3 cowboys accused of robbing a glue factory?
No.
They denied it and are sticking to their guns. It's great. Traveler. If you like The Expanse, go check out Traveler. David, it's been a treat. Thank you.
Thank you.
2:30 in the morning, I was beginning to wish I had never come to cadet training school. To the south lay water. There was no way we could cross that. To the east and west, 2 armies squeezed us in a pincer. The only way was north. I had to go for it and pray the gods were smiling on me. I picked up the dice and threw 2 6s. Caldecott couldn't believe it. My go again. Another 2 6s. Remember, what's wrong with you? Don't you realize that no one is even slightly interested in anything you're saying? You've got this major psychological defect which blinds to the fact that you're boring people to death. How come you can't sense that? Anyway, I picked up the dice again. Unbelievable. Another 2 6s.
Remember?
What?
No one wants to know some stupid story about how you beat your cadet school training officer at risk.
Then disaster. I threw a 2 and a 3. Caldecott picked up the dice and threw snake eyes. I was still in it.
Can you talk to him? What?
Anyway, to cut a long story short, I threw a 5 and a 4, which beat his 3 and a 2, another double 6, followed by a double 4 and a double 5. After he'd thrown a 3 and a 2, I threw a 6 and a 3.
Man, this guy could ball for his country. What I want to know is how the smack can you remember what dice you threw at a game you played when you were 17?
I jotted it down in my risk campaign book. I always used to do that. So I could replay my moments of glory over a glass of brandy in the sleeping quarters. I ask you, what better way is there to spend a Saturday night?
You got me.
So, a 6 and a 3, and he came back with a 3 and a 2.
Remember, can't you tell the story is not gripping me? I am in a state of non-gripness. I am completely smagging, ungripped. Shoot the smag up.
Don't you want to hear the risk story?
That's what I've been saying for the last 15 minutes.
But I thought that was because I hadn't got to the really interesting bit.
What really interesting bit?
Ah, well, that was about 2 hours later. After he'd thrown a 3 and a 2, and I'd thrown a 4 and a 1, I picked up the dice.
Hang on. The really interesting bit is exactly the same as the dull bit.
You don't know what I did with the dice, though, do you? For all you know, I could have jammed them up his nostrils, head-butted him on the nose, and they could have blasted out of his ears. That'll be quite interesting.
Hey, Remit, what did you do with the dice?
I threw a 5 and a 2.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.